Salt is one of the most common and essential elements in our daily lives. We use it to flavor food, preserve meals, and even as part of traditional remedies. Yet, beyond its physical uses, the Bible reveals that salt carries a much deeper and more profound meaning. From the Old Testament sacrifices to the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament, salt emerges as a powerful spiritual symbol and, in many ways, a hidden spiritual weapon. To unlock its significance, we must understand why God placed such emphasis on salt and how it connects to our faith journey today. In the ancient world, salt was extremely valuable. In fact, it was sometimes traded like currency. It was prized because it preserved food, preventing decay, and added taste to otherwise bland meals. The Bible uses these natural qualities of salt as spiritual metaphors. In Leviticus 2 verse 13, God commands, "Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings." Here, salt is called the salt of the covenant, showing that it was not only a physical ingredient but a spiritual sign of permanence, faithfulness, and purity. Just as salt preserves food from spoiling, God's covenant was to preserve His people from spiritual corruption. Salt also carries the meaning of purification and holiness. In biblical times, salt was sometimes used in rituals to cleanse and sanctify. For example, when the prophet Elisha healed the waters of Jericho, he cast salt into the spring and declared God's word of healing. 2 Kings 2 verses 19 to 22. The result was pure, life-giving water instead of bitter water. This account shows us that salt can symbolize the removal of corruption and the restoration of life. Spiritually, this points to how God purifies us through His Word and His Spirit, transforming what is bitter into something fruitful. In the New Testament, Jesus expands on the spiritual meaning of salt. In Matthew 5 verse 13 He declares, "You are the salt of the earth." This statement gives believers an incredible responsibility. Just as salt preserves and flavors, Christians are called to preserve godly values in a decaying world and to add the flavor of God's love and truth to the lives of others. Without salt, food becomes tasteless. Without the influence of faithful believers, the world loses the essence of righteousness and purpose. Salt, then, is not just symbolic, it is a calling for us to live lives that influence and impact others positively. Furthermore, salt in the Bible also represents peace and friendship. In ancient cultures, sharing salt at a meal was a sign of trust and covenant. Numbers 18:19 mentions a covenant of salt, which signifies an everlasting, unbreakable bond. Spiritually, this reflects God's unchanging promises to His people and the lasting fellowship we have with Him. Salt becomes a symbol of eternal relationship, showing that God's faithfulness is never temporary but enduring. Another powerful aspect of salt as a spiritual weapon is its connection to spiritual warfare. Just as salt drives away decay and corruption in the physical sense, believers are called to resist the spiritual corruption of sin and darkness. When we walk in holiness, proclaim God's word, and live as salt of the earth, we are pushing back against the forces of evil that seek to corrupt and destroy. In this sense, salt is not only symbolic of purity but also a reminder that we are equipped with God's truth to overcome the enemy. Today, unlocking the power of salt means recognizing its spiritual depth and applying it in our daily walk with God. We are called to be preservers of truth, agents of purity, and carriers of God's covenant faithfulness. Just as Elisha used salt to heal water, we too can bring healing, peace, and restoration into the lives of those around us by living out the power of God's word. Every time we see salt, it can serve as a reminder of our calling, to live faithfully, influence the world positively, and hold fast to God's eternal covenant. In conclusion, salt in the Bible is far more than a seasoning or preservative. It is a spiritual symbol of covenant, purity, preservation, influence, and even warfare against corruption. It is a reminder that as followers of Christ, we are meant to live with purpose, to bring healing, and to preserve the truth of God's kingdom on earth. Truly, salt is one of the hidden spiritual weapons revealed in the Bible, pointing us back to God's faithfulness and our calling to be His light in a world that desperately needs flavor and preservation.